no crime ever goes untalked about, would be my premise, because people talk about everything that they do. If you might have a serial killer that never talks about their crime, but we're not talking about that crime. We're talking about a crime of a political crime that the people who were involved in obviously had some kind of an agenda. It was politics, it was revenge, it was envy, there's something, it's not another type of crime. So the premise would be that people will talk eventually. They won't go public, but they'll talk in the way I described. They'll talk to their family, they'll talk to people they think they can trust because they're getting it off their chest. And the point of the book was that there is a consistent body of information that does show that some people did talk and some people did gossip and some people did talk to people when they shouldn't have, even beforehand, that this was not a perfect situation and that there are all sorts of bits and pieces of evidence over the place if you can tie them together and connect the dots, and if you can corroborate them. One of the biggest challenges that we have is looking at what people say and trying to test the issue of whether they could have known what they're saying. That's probably the biggest acid test. What were they doing when they would have heard it? Who did they know when they would have heard it? Who were they talking to? Can you trace the lines of gossip? That sort of credibility is one of the biggest issues going with this, because we're not dealing with science. Downstairs we have people talking about neutron activation analysis, film analysis, chains of evidence. This is soft. There's never any certainty to this sort of research because you're talking about people as sources. All that you can come up with is a judgment. And on the other hand, of course, that means it's circumstantial evidence, but circumstantial evidence is perfectly admissible in a legal sense. It just depends on whether or not you can convince the jury to accept it. And that's where we go a lot of times, is it convincing when the bottom line is done? And so what occurred to me then is to go start looking at people that had been either investigated by various committees and not explored sufficiently, or who had not been investigated at all. And I spent several other years parsing through those people, trying to determine if there was anyone that would be a linchpin. And that's what led me to John Martino, who was actually revealed as a source to the House Select Committee by a couple of his friends, but who was very under-investigated by the House Select Committee by a variety of reasons. And after examining him in great detail, it appeared to me that virtually everything that was reasonable to believe about him as a source could be verified. He was in the right place to have known the things he claimed to know. He didn't claim to know more than he could have known. He was in the right place, he knew the right people, and he said a limited number of things that were very consistent. Basically, he said that he was associated with a conspiracy in a very minor fashion. He told this to two of the people, one business partner, and both the individuals shortly before his death, one business partner and one local reporter in Miami who had covered his return from being imprisoned in Cuba. And what he essentially said was that he had been used as a courier to carry information, money, make contacts in the travels that he'd been making that fall to New Orleans and to Dallas, and that essentially the conspiracy, the plan was to kill John Kennedy and make it look as if a Castro-connected patsy had done the affair, to do it in a fashion where it was obviously Castro communist inspired, and to not only eliminate John Kennedy, who the people doing it considered to be a traitor and at least communist leaning, but also to provoke an attack on Cuba and oust Castro from Cuba. David Morales is another one of those people, when you start parsing people that made remarks, that you have to consider in this. Because, I mean, one of the things, if you reach the conclusion that John Martino is a reliable source for the limited amount of information that John Martino related, then one of the logical steps is to say, well, who was in contact with John Martino in 1963? Who could have brought him into anything? Who could have supported what he was doing? And you can tie him to 3 or 4 people that he obviously knew well. And one person that he knew well was David Morales, who was Senior Operations Officer at JM Wave. We knew him well because he's actually in John Martino's book about being imprisoned in Cuba, and John Martino knows he's a CIA officer. John Martino, as your regular citizen, should not know this about David Morales. David Morales even relates personal objection. I mean, John Martino relates personal objections that David Morales had to the way affairs were being conducted in Cuba. He would not know this if he didn't know David Morales. John Martino was involved in a Cuban penetration mission into Cuba in 1963 that occurred under David Morales' management. So there's no doubt that he knew the man, he knew them fairly well personally, and that David Morales and people that worked for him knew John Martino. Then when you're presented with the fact that John Martino made the remark in front of his lawyer and his best friend in a drunken state, true, but there's really actually nothing wrong with a drunken state if you want the truth. You know, it's sort of like administering sodium pentothal. You just need to be able to sort out what's real and what isn't. When a career covert operations officer in the CIA who has just spent an hour expressing his personal hatred of John Kennedy says, but that's okay, we took care of the SOB, I think you have to take the man seriously. You know, again, it's contextual. That's a judgment, but I'm not willing to write off someone who has had a career based on eliminating people out of the picture when he says something like that. Especially, it doesn't, again, the people that are credible are not the people that would go in a newspaper. They not do books. They talk to somebody, but it's somebody they think will never, ever, ever repeat what they say.